Welcome to another video where I play some cool guitar stuff for you. Today I'm going to be playing through this cool little guy right here. This is a little preamp made by a buddy of mine, Nick Perrano of Fretgood Amplifiers. He builds amplifiers and he also builds these. This is a little preamp, even though you can see that it has a power tube, a 6V6, and then a preamp tube, a 12AX7 here. This is not actually an amplifier. You plug it into the speaker cabinet directly. It does absolutely nothing. This is only a preamp, and it's modeled after an old Fender Champ. And the reason that he did this as a preamp is because, of course, there's no effects loop on the original Fenders. That's all a modern thing. If you get a Fender now, they'll have an effects loop, but it's not the original thing. So he wanted something that sounded like the original Fender Champ, and you could put it in front of a reverb, a delay, a chorus, whatever you want, and have it sound good going into a solid state power amp. So essentially that's what I'm going to be doing, demonstrating for you here, is putting it through a solid state power amp. The power amp happens to be my PRS HG70, which I'll go ahead and flip on, except that it's creating way too much hum. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for now. And I'm just going to be going into the effects return on this amplifier. I will do eventually a review of this thing just because they're so weird and rare. You don't see a lot of them. Only made a couple hundred of them. But for now, it's all about this little Fretgood right here. So for this, I'm going to be playing through my trusty 1994 Gibson Les Paul Classic Plus. Just had a couple of mods since you saw it in the last video, which is actually why you didn't see it in the last video. I was only playing through my Greco. It was currently getting worked on, or it was getting worked on at the time. I went with a nylon nut, not so much for vintage tone, although I kind of wanted to get this closer to vintage specs, but because it's a much better slotted and cut nut, and as long as I was going with a new one, might as well go with a nylon one. I went with a vintage wiring in here. This has bare knuckle 550K pots, so a little bit brighter, more like what you'd experience out of a vintage Central Lab. And the really cool part, though, is the bridge. I went with a vintage patent number bridge from the 60s, his original bridge, correct thumb wheels made out of the correct thickness and the correct brass, correct steel posts, and went with inch long instead of the modern 3/4 inch posts in here for the stop tailpiece. And of course, this is the old Clouson aluminum. Still has the bare knuckle mules in there. So let's take a listen to this, and I've got out my trusty headphones here. Just to make sure that I'm not going to go deaf, going into the Marshall 1960A cab, and yeah, it's G12 T75s in here, but I think that they actually do a pretty good job of representing this amplifier. So now let's turn everything on. So the way the controls work are, it has over here your gain and on-off switch. You can see the light turns on and off whenever I actually flip this around. So this is your gain, your tone, and your master volume. Okay. So I've got the little preamplifier set to noon here, everything on 12 o'clock. So sounding pretty... nice and vintagey Fender kind of thing. Kind of on the edge of breakup. Responsive to picking dynamics. That's on the bridge pickup, everything on 10. So this thing also is really responsive to your guitar's controls. I mean, that's why I love vintage kind of voiced amplifiers, because they really do amazing changes. I generally don't use the mid position on my Les Paul here. I don't have much of a chance to, as you can see on the wall from the Ace Frehley outfit in a Kiss tribute band, so generally it's neck pickup turned off. But playing through this thing, boy. So now I'm on the neck pickup. You can hear it clearly. I tuned it around the E chord. Oh. That's better. Nice and warm. So let's hear how it sounds with interacting with the tone and volume. Ooh, man. All right, so now you've heard everything at noon. What I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the gain. So this is kind of your preamp gain, turning up the gain on the 12AX7 here. So now I'm going to turn that to 3 o'clock, leave the other two at noon, master volume and tone. I see why Joe Bonamassa likes Gibsons through Fenders so much. On the neck pickup. So getting a lot of low end on that one there, and back in the middle position. And when you dig in and give it some real gusto, it really does give a lot back to you. So now I've got the master volume up to 3 o'clock, and you're going to really hear this thing start to give a lot more. Let's hear the tone control. Let's bring it back a little bit. I'm going to darken this up a lot and see how we get some kind of more muffled tones. All the way off. Whew, a lot of low end there. Also, I'm going through a big 412 cabinet, but you can hear there's still a lot of clarity even on the lower settings. So let's go above noon. Let's go to about 2 o'clock. So definitely, I think this really captures a lot of that early Zeppelin vibe, particularly on the first album where he was going through a little Supro practice amp through a 12-inch speaker. Low power, a lot of air moving though. Second album going through like Vox hybrid amps. And his Les Paul. So now let's kind of hear, I want to hear just how loud this thing can get. I'm going to bring the gain back, but the volume, I want to max it out, bring the tone back just a little bit. So this is max volume if you're going through a solid state power amp. Yeah, that's pretty darn awesome. So here I'm starting to get more of the power tube breaking up than the preamp tube. And it's really darn loud in here, let me tell you right now. And now let's turn the volume all the way up. I've set the tone to just above noon, the gain to just below noon, and here's what we get. That is really neat. I'm going to set it as clean as I can, but as loud as I can. Nice, rich, lush 3D cleans, you know. Okay, so now as you can hear, there's a lot of hum because I have the volume and the gain maxed. Tone is at noon. And it cleans up beautifully. That is just a thing of beauty. Let's go ahead and turn that off and turn you off as well. So, not that this is a commercial for a friend's product, but I mean, if you're in the market for a really cool sounding preamp, I would just so highly recommend one of these. It's the only preamp I know about that uses an actual power tube. Every other one I can think of uses usually ECC 83s or 12AX7s, 12AT7s, those kinds of things. Usually using just preamp tubes. Maybe there are other ones, I don't know. But let me know about them. Actually, I'd kind of like to know more. But this has that sound, that vintage cranked Fender, and even more so. I think this has more gain than a vintage Fender would, even cranked. But it's just perfect for a tiny gig. You have a little solid state power amp. Maybe you have, like I have a Bad Cat Unleash, which I use as a solid state power amp. And you can use, of course, the effects return for any major amplifier, a big old head like this, and just use the power section for that. I hope this is helpful because I think a lot of people would love to know, can you go gig and get reasonable vintage tones out of a small preamp? And I think you can. I think you can get all the great sound of a tube amp from not a lot of tubes. That you don't have to bias this, as far as I know from what Nick has talked to me about. It's one power amp, a 6V6, and one preamp, a 12AX7, and then through a solid state power amp. And you have all the volume, all the cool, great tone that you could ever possibly want. I love digital modeling, but sometimes you just want that cool little greasy sound of a Class A amplifier. If you want to know more about this little head, Nick does make them to order. Just go to Fretgood Amplifiers on Facebook, and I can't say enough good things about him or his amplifiers. He makes great stuff, and he's fixed all of my amplifiers over the years, and I trust him implicitly. So check him out. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. Bye!